13 Days Cuban Missile Crisis. This is one that I got as a review item, actually. And it's by Jolly Roger. Jolly Roger's done a couple of things I've looked at recently that, well, not recently, but for some time ago, quite a while ago. And I'm kind of trying to remember what. A couple of Euro-ish type things. This is really a stripped down CDG style game based on the Cuban Missile Crisis. And let's see, I don't remember. You end up with 3 turns, I think, of essentially 4 cards each. That's 12 days, and then sort of an aftermath card. Time-wise, that centers the whole thing about. I'm trying to remember what they did. I have the feeling they did the the Founding Fathers, the one that I didn't do most recently. And I'm having a hard time seeing whether they did. See, I've got the Rick Helly one there, but the other one's kicking around somewhere. There it is. And yeah, I think that's Jolly Roger. That was a pretty good game. It's hard for me to read. Anyway, this one, you know, good component quality, tiny little map. Comes with a book of the history and something about the, you know, about the cards that are in play. A rule book that's quite thick. When you touch it, you're like, whoa. The actuality, though, is a good part of it's the playthrough. And I see David Janik Jones. He's probably the person who convinced the designer, hey, send it to this guy. Because I know he watched or watches some of my coverage. So that's cool. And, you know, I'm not trying to cover too many games this way anymore. But when people reach out to me, hey, why not? It's not like I'm swamped with requests to do games. All right, let's take a look at the rules for this. I'm going to try to do this guy in one video, but I may end up having to cut it in half. We'll see. But it's a fairly short game. Okay. So you have your sort of standard Euro-style setup picture here. I'm not too fond of this kind of thing, but it does tell you what you have to do. You put some cubes. You have a limited number of cubes per player, 17 per player, and they're going to indicate influence in different sorts of battlegrounds in the world. So some of them may be military or political, and the others are sort of more of a world opinion type thing. Now these come with certain bonuses to them, which we'll talk about in a moment. The U.S. player starts off with the personal letter. I don't remember what that represents. It's like correspondences with the Secretary General or something. And yeah, I don't know enough about the history here to really talk too much about that. But you have a set of agenda cards, which are going to be things that you aim for in your turn. And you're going to be dealt 3 of these in each turn. And essentially you pick one of them as your goal. But all of them get marked, not explicitly what your goal is, but in general what it probably is. You don't necessarily know what the victory points are, although they are kind of printed on here. They may not always be exactly what's appearing there. And then you get a handful of these, which are your, you know, standard ops act event type cards. And these are going to have a number on it. The ops side of things is going to be represented in cubes, which you'll see how those work. And then the event is spelled out there. It uses a Twilight Struggle type system in terms of how the cards are used. You have a shared deck, and if you play a card for operations, your own cards that have your ops and events on them, you can play as either an operation or an event. But if you play your opponent's event card, he has the opportunity to trigger that event. Now, like in Twilight Struggle, you have a way to bury your cards. So it really is it shows its roots very, very much here. Let's see what else we have here. This is basically your victory point track. You're trying to slide these as far as you can. They've got hard limits though at the 5. Once you get past there, once you get to there, you can't go past it. And let's take a look at the sequence of play. So your goal in the game is basically to get this marker as far to your side as you can, or anywhere to your side, without causing a nuclear war. If you cause a nuclear war, you lose the game. And this over here is the DEFCON track, and you're going to lose the game if you end up at DEFCON 1 at the end of a turn, or if all 3 of your pieces end up at DEFCON 2. So the first thing you do in the turn, and this I forgot when we played, I played this with my wife once, is all the DEFCON markers move forward 1 space. So you've got this kind of constant pressure to keep the DEFCON low, but there are going to be agenda items that you want to have higher DEFCON ratings on. Then you draw your agendas, and like I said, you get 3 of these to each player. You shuffle the deck, and once an agenda is played, I think it's done. But the ones that don't get played, you get to shove back in. You grab these, get 3 of these cards, and you have to decide on, well, first you mark the 3 that you got with your little flags. So, for example, you know, let's say this is the Soviet draw. I'd have the Atlantic, I'd have Berlin, and I'd have Cuba. And that means that my opponent knows what my options were, basically. And you can see the Atlantic, it matches this plus X. Now, familiarity with the cards, like in a lot of CDGs, is going to help you here. I don't know how much it's really that painful in terms of distorting the storyline. I know in Twilight Struggle and Paths of Glory and some of the other games, you need to know the cards to play well, and you kind of don't want to know the cards to be faced with the historical situation. I don't think that's the case, at least with these cards. With the strategy cards, maybe a little bit more. Okay, so in this case, you'll be getting prestige points if you meet this goal, but your opponent is also being rated on the same thing. So whoever dominates the Atlantic gets a prestige point equal to the difference of the cubes that they have associated there. Now, I think there's a limit of 5 cubes per area. So, you know, given that you know where his possible plays are, you can really kind of make a guess at what your opponent's doing, and you can just try to cover him. The problem is, if he's got a stronger hand than you do, or a stronger starting position, like the Russians have a cube in 2 of these already, then you don't know for sure which one's going to happen. Now here's the other side, which is, say, Berlin here. The dominating player gets prestige equal to the difference in the influence cubes plus 1. So this is a more valuable choice, but you don't necessarily want to choose that one because your opponent does know, you know, what your options were and what you may have taken. So there's, you know, a bit of a game of bluffing here, but a lot of it's in the open. Okay. So then, after you draw the agenda, you secretly pick one, and you're going to put it under here. And that indicates for that turn what you're aiming for. The others, you throw back into the agenda deck, and your opponent does the same thing. Okay. If the agenda card has a DEFCON marker on it, that means what? That means it's going to have an effect on DEFCON directly. So for example here, if this is the World Opinion card that's chosen, you escalate all DEFCON markers on the World Opinion DEFCON 2, this little section here, by 1 step, which could throw you into DEFCON 1, and it could conceivably cause somebody to lose the game because they start World War III. And then the dominating player gets a difference in influence cubes plus 1, which is going to be the cubes over in the United Nations. There are different kinds of cards. These are the DEFCON card, the DEFCON track cards. So Here you'd escalate the DEFCON markers in Area 2 by 1 step, and this is important here particularly, not just because it could cause somebody to lose the game, but the dominating player gets prestige equal to the difference in influence cubes plus 1. You know, I played this and trying to remember what that means. So I didn't think that was influence cubes. I thought it was the difference in the DEFCON track. Let's see if there's... Maybe put cubes on the track? I didn't think so. Resolve agendas. Yeah, see, this is supposed to say DEFCON steps on it. It's the difference in DEFCON steps. And that is... not stated correctly on any of the cards, interestingly enough. Okay. Well, whatever. Okay. So then the next thing you do is you get your strategy cards, and you get 5 of these. Now you're going to get to play 4 of them. You get to look at them, and whoever's losing on this track gets to choose which player goes first. Generally, you're going to want to go second here, but there might be times when you don't. If the players are tied, the USSR gets to decide who goes first. Now, like I explained, you can play your strategy cards in 2 ways. Let's get a few of these. One is you can play it for the cubes involved in it. And then you're going to get to place or decrease cubes on the board. Now, decreasing is important because you're limited to 17 cubes total. So for example, here, Guns of August, well, I got 3 cubes. I could drop these all in Cuba. Now, what that does, when I do that, is it's going to increase the political DEFCON status by 1 less than the number of cubes I added to the area. And that pushes up, say, 2. Okay? That might be important if there's one of these in play, and it's possible that a flag is over here instead of on a battleground, right? If you had one of those agendas items as your option. Okay. You can also withdraw cubes. And like I said, since you're limited to the number of cubes that you have, you may want to do this. So, for example, if this was my situation and I played this cube, I could withdraw 1 from Cuba. And again, it's going to affect the DEFCON status, but it's going to affect it negatively by 1 cube less than you withdraw. Well, 1 cube less than 1 is 0, so I'm not going to end up withdrawing anything. But if I withdrew 2 cubes instead of the 1, this would reduce the DEFCON status. And since cube is a political battleground, it'll be off this green track by 1 space. Sometimes something you need to do is drop the DEFCON, because otherwise you'll lose the game, right? Remember, those go up once each time. The other option you have is you can play them for an event. And if it's a United Nations card, anybody can play the event. So like escalate, deflate one of your DEFCON tracks by up to 2 steps. Hey, that's a cool card. And then you get to command, you get to use one of your influence cubes. Either put it on the board or take it off. If the DEFCON symbol is here, or the radiation symbol or whatever, that means any cubes that you're playing with have an effect on the DEFCON. That's not really a big deal here. This is affecting DEFCON, so that's what this is saying. But this one is a Russian card, which means the Russian player has the option of playing it for 1 cube or put up to 3 influence cubes on the Atlantic battleground. Those cubes, because of this symbol here, will affect the DEFCON track. So I could toss 3 cubes in there, but that'll raise this by 2. If that DEFCON symbol was not there, I could put cubes in here without raising it. This says only place cubes. It doesn't say command them, so I can't withdraw cubes from there. And if I don't have enough cubes, well, then this card is not as valuable as it could be. If the US is holding this card, they could play it for the cube count, But if they do so, the Russians have the right to trigger the event. Which is an interesting situation because, like in Twilight Struggle, if you get cards of the opponent, that means you're going to be offering the opponent options. On the bright side, if you get opponent cards, that means he's probably got some of your cards. Maybe. You know, it depends on the mixture. Okay. So you do this 4 times going through here. And I think you alternate. Yeah, I believe you alternate those cards. And after each person takes 4 card turns, then each person has 1 extra card, which they slip into the Aftermath deck. That card, if it's in favor of your faction, ends up being worth a point, being worth some influence points at the end of the game. So that's of some value to hold a card that's of your faction. If you hold a card that's of the UN, it doesn't count towards anyone. If you hold an opponent's faction card to the end, you're giving him some score towards that final point at the end of the game. Okay. Next thing that happens is these are assessed. Now, whoever has the most influence cubes in each one of them gets a bonus. If it's the television, that player can raise or decrease one of their own DEFCON statuses by 1 step. And this can prevent you from ending the game in a nuclear war if you have that. The United Nations Battleground, you get the personal letter card from the opponent. Hey, what can you use that for? Yeah, we'll get to it. If the player already has the personal letter card, it doesn't matter that you had the edge there, except you're not going to lose it. The Alliance's Battleground, this is kind of neat. Whoever has the dominating power there gets to draw a strategy card, peek at it, and decide whether or not to slip it into the Aftermath deck during this little step here. Okay. Then you flip over and reveal the agendas that the players have. Let's just say he has one here. And what you do is you look, hey, who's got the most in Berlin? Oh, look, the Russians have 1 there, so they dominate it. And they get a +1. Whoever dominated it would get that +1. So they're going to get 2 influence points in their favor. And at the same time, you'd resolve whichever card the Blues had played, the U.S. played. In which case, you know, first you'd resolve this, escalate the DEFCON markers that are in the 2 zone by 1 space, and then you count the difference in DEFCON rating between the 2 players and add 1 to that difference, and that becomes a prestige difference. They're resolved simultaneously, so, you know, if you're in a situation like this and you score Berlin, well, it might cancel out the scoring here and you get to stay here. You don't say, oh, I'm running off the track, and then score the other guy. There's no ordering to that. Okay. And the next thing is you check for nuclear war. And like I said, if you end up with a DEFCON marker in DEFCON 1 at this stage in the game, you lose. If all 3 of your markers are in the DEFCON 2 area, you lose. If both people are in the position where they'd lose at the same time, you both launch a first strike and you both lose. Honestly, everybody loses, but whatever, you know. And then you move the round marker another step. And eventually you'll hit to here and finish the 3rd turn, and then you go here where you get to a scoring round. And here you look at the Aftermath cards, and there'll be a stack of these in here, and you count however many cubes there are for each side. Like, let's say this is the pile. Well, there'd be 1 Russian cube here, and there'd be 4 US cubes, and then there's, for some reason, 3 UN cubes, which would never happen. But you ignore the UN cubes, but there's a 3-point difference in favor of the US, and whoever has the highest total gets 2 bonus prestige off that. So it's 2 points instead of 1. It's not the full count of the cubes that are going into the Aftermath, which means if you've already started stocking that with high cards from your opponent, well, you might as well keep doing it. right? Whoever has the most prestige wins. If there's a tie, it goes to the person with the personal letter. Hey, what about that personal letter? Well, I can't read it, so let's see what it does. The U.S., I believe, starts with it. And it's in here somewhere. The person holding the personal letter may on his turn play it alongside a strategy card to increase its influence by 1, and then your opponent gets the personal letter. This is not a magical thing. It just gives you an additional cube to play with. But all the same, that can be useful to winning a fight. Of course, if you're passing him the personal letter, he immediately then, on his next turn, has that ability to increase 1 by 1. So, we actually didn't see it change hands. I think it's much more likely to change hands if someone holds the advantage in the UN, because then they're going to be able to do it. I honestly think this has taken 20 minutes to explain. I'm going to break this into the multi-video parts, because I don't think I can get the game in 30 minutes on video. It just takes longer to do videos than otherwise. So we'll give a look at how it actually plays in a little bit.